Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. We're so excited to have you join us for our Employment First Work to Include Summit this afternoon and the next 2 days. We are in store for wonderful array of robust presentations and informative conversations, and are so glad that you're joining us today. My name's Pat Rogan. I am the co-director of the Work to Include Coalition, professor at IUPUI, and your moderator today. Let's take a quick look at our agenda. We're going to begin with some welcoming remarks and an overview of Work to Include for those of you who are just becoming familiar. Then we're going to shift to addresses from each of our main state agency leaders and other state leaders around employment first efforts going on in Indiana. We're going to then take a wider lens and hear from some national speakers around, what are the activities, what are the progress that we've made, and where do we need to go from here. We'll then back into some state policy focus with another national speaker, and then it's your turn. We'll want to get into small groups, have discussions in the breakout room feature at the end of this afternoon. And we want to hear from you in terms of where do we go from here? What are our next steps? So just a little cue about the audio. You will all be muted during these presentations, but you'll be unmuted during the breakout room discussions. So if you need any of the handouts from all of the presentations today, you can find them at our worktoinclude.org website. And without further ado, I want to thank all of our sponsors and hosts, and a special thanks to both Karen Reese and Kelsey Daniel at IU Conferences for all of their behind the scenes work to put on this event. Special thanks to the Indiana Governor's Council for People with Disabilities and the Executive Director, Christine Dahlberg, who has provided extraordinary leadership around the Employment First initiative. Thank you to Indiana APSE for all of your support and involvement to move Employment First agenda forward, and to IUPUI and specifically the School of Education for hosting this initiative. We are so excited to have Suzanne Crouch, the Indiana Lieutenant Governor, kick off our summit. And we appreciate her direct involvement in support and the leadership out of the governor's office for advancing employment for all Hoosiers, including individuals with disabilities. Here's Suzanne. You can cue the video.
Hello, and welcome to the Work to Include Employment First Summit. Thank you for the invitation to join you today. And I apologize I'm not able to join everyone live, but I am more than happy to share these recorded comments with leaders who work to make sure all Hoosiers succeed. It's one of my life's greatest honors to serve as the 52nd Lieutenant Governor of Indiana and to partner with Governor Eric Holcomb. I truly believe for Indiana to reach the next level, all Hoosiers must be lifted. As Lieutenant Governor, one of my roles includes chairing the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Task Force, which champions on issues important to these individuals and their families. The task force came up with several recommendations to better serve Hoosiers, and while a number of them have already been implemented, more progress was made these past several months. Last month, our 2021 legislative session came to a close, and during those 16 weeks and the past several months, we have been quite busy passing new laws and working with individuals with disabilities, their families, and their advocates to remove barriers in their lives. I wanted to spend a few minutes providing you an update on some of the things that have taken place. One new law passed at the State House will raise the average wage of our direct service providers to $15 an hour. This brings DSP's earnings on a level competitive with other service sector and healthcare workers, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And this increase will help attract and retain the best professionals to better ensure Hoosiers with disabilities continue to receive the life-sustaining services they need. We also focused on removing barriers to employment opportunities. A new law will require the Department of Workforce Development to reach out to former students with disabilities and provide them with the assistance in earning a diploma or help them receive workforce training to get jobs. Data shows us that close to 80% of individuals with disabilities are unemployed. And I look forward to seeing this new law put to work and hopefully get more Hoosiers that diploma and learn new skills so they have more and new opportunities to find work near their homes. At the same time, our vocational rehabilitation business and community engagement team continues to assist employers with their disability inclusion efforts across the state. Team members are key collaborators with the Employment First Advisory Committee. They contribute research and provide input to important projects, like the Employment First Employer Toolkit, which launched in October. The committee is also responsible for producing the presentation on the Employment First initiative to Indiana state personnel. You know, we also have some great partnerships with Hoosier employers that I would like to highlight. First, last summer, Indiana Vocational Rehabilitation partnered with disability consultant James Emmett and Company and Indiana Beach for its summer employment hiring initiative. The program had great success with more than 50 persons with disabilities working through the entire summer. And next, Toyota in Princeton is a solid longtime partner with its disability hiring initiative. The company remains an economic powerhouse, making another large investment in Indiana about a month ago. And at the same time, realizing how important diversity is not only to its bottom line, but also to company culture. And finally, youth work-based learning experiences are being created with organizations across our state, including Deaf Kids Code in Lafayette and a local hospital corporation here in Indianapolis. We encourage more businesses and organizations to follow in the steps of these partners to further provide more wonderful employment opportunities for Hoosiers with disabilities. In closing, I want to thank everyone participating in this event for your work on becoming part of the solution to ensure all Hoosiers can experience the same hopes and dreams of having a job that they truly enjoy. And I hope the next few hours help each of you continue your commitment to lifting all Hoosiers, especially in the workplace.
Thank you so much to the Lieutenant Governor. Next, we're going to hear from Christine Dahlberg, the Executive Director of the Governor's Council for People with Disabilities. And the council is funding and supporting the Employment First Work to Include initiative. And we want to just share a very special thanks to Christine for her ongoing leadership and expertise in supporting this initiative, and an early congratulations on her pending retirement. Christine?
Thanks, Pat. Yes, I'm retiring at the end of June, so really looking forward to that, but I'm really regretful for leaving my colleagues in the disability community and the exciting work we're doing, especially in the employment first arena. The council has a deep commitment to employment of people with disabilities, and that is reflected in our 5-year state plan. We're currently in the process of developing a brand new 5-year state plan that will take effect on October 1st of this year. And I can assure you that that plan has an equal commitment to employment first in Indiana. So we expect to be continuing our work in relation to employment first for the foreseeable future, or at least the next 5 years, which is how long the plan will continue going. For far too long, there has been very limited progress in actual employment of people with disabilities, especially people with more significant disabilities. And it's really time for that to change. And this Employment First initiative that Indiana is getting behind in all aspects of government and programs and services will really move the needle on making sure that Hoosiers with disabilities have equal opportunity and equity in getting good paying jobs in the community, in integrated settings, competitive jobs that pay a living wage. And that's what our goal is. And I think that we're on our way to achieving it.
Thank you so much, Christine. Really appreciate those comments, and you will be missed. Next, I'd like to introduce Brian Peer, who's the president of Indiana APSE. Brian?
Make sure I'm up there. Welcome. Thanks for letting me be part of this presentation today. It's exciting to see just into the first couple already of what everyone's trying to accomplish in this. We're all on the same page on getting integrated wages work. And APSE has been trying for years to work on this policy. Thanks to Tina Skilwich, who I see is on this call, Brian Gilbert, and several others that's been part of this initiative to get these laws and initiatives passed. We're very appreciative to be part of this, and we want to thank everyone that's on the call today to get everything out of it that you want to get out of it today. That's what I got for you, Susan. And we appreciate Susan and Pat for what you're doing with Work to Include. I've been reading a lot on it this past year, and you guys have come a long way those last couple of years to keep pushing the needle.
Thanks so much, Brian. And we really appreciate the partnership with APSE, both state and national. Next, we're going to hear from Susan Rennie, who's my partner in crime, co-director of the Work to Include initiative, and professional and personal person extraordinaire. Susan?
Hello, everybody. Can you see my screen? We good?
Yes.
Somebody nod for me.
Yes, it's good.
Excellent.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Susan Rennie here, co-director with the wonderful Dr. Pat Rogan. I just want to say how much fun it's been working with Dr. Rogan for the past 3 years. We were colleagues at the Institute many years ago, and so I jumped at the chance to work with her again. It's just been wonderful. And my job is to tell you a little bit about Work to Include if you don't already know about it. We, with the leadership of the Governor's Council for Persons with Disabilities and Christine Dahlberg, thought about an initiative where we would engage people with disabilities in the development of employment first policies. Because we felt like if we engaged people with disabilities, we could better eliminate barriers and design statewide systems that worked for everybody. Because who better than the people that are using those systems to tell us what is and isn't working? So it's been a wonderful opportunity to listen and to get people with disabilities at the table in making real change. And at the same time, we thought we would take both a bottom-up and a top-down approach, that we wanted to engage people with disabilities at the state level, but we also wanted to look at local initiatives and see what people could do locally to dispel the myths that employers and people with disabilities and family members have about employment. And I'll show you in a minute what we came up with. And then the other, final goal what we had was to document the employment success of people with disabilities. And so through our efforts with the employer awareness campaign, we're able to highlight some really great examples of people working in the community. So this is us. Dr. Rogan and I are co-directors. We also have a communications person, a very talented Case Calvert. If you have not seen our website, please go. And if you like it, I would engage Case in a minute to update and to make your website as absolutely wonderful and as functional as that. And then we recently hired a new person to help coordinate things on the local level. Her name is Karen Reese. We're really excited to welcome her. And then I also wanted to point out that we have an advisory committee that's worked with us along the way to develop this initiative, to help us make sure that we are looking at all of the issues through the eyes of individuals and advocates. And that includes Self-Advocates of Indiana, Indiana Disability Rights, NAPC, the Governor's Council, DDARS, Department of Education, Mental Health America, the City of Indianapolis, and NSILC, just to name all, not a few. And we have, at the very beginning, we started by engaging people with disabilities at the local level to help design local initiatives. And so we have several team members that if we were all together, I would love for them to be able to wave to you and you can acknowledge their wonderful contributions locally. Zulie Alvarado, Denise Babjack, Bonnie Bomer, Deanne Hart, Mark Hubler, Josh Miller, Jared Price, Jeffrey Shear. They probably are all on this call. And if you get a chance to see them in the breakout room, say thanks for us. So as I said earlier, we came together and we held town halls across the state and we asked people, what are the ways that we can eliminate some of the barriers? We wanted to take a positive approach and get people's ideas for what would make a difference. And these are the things that were common across those town halls, that everyone said we have to be really clear and unified around state policies and funding. So that's one of the big initiatives at the state level, is to develop that employment first plan. We have to have transportation options. We have to hold people accountable for employment outcomes. We need to invest heavily in high school programs so students leave school with jobs or on their career path or in post-secondary education. We need to really look at how benefits planning is provided to people, and we'll talk a lot about that on day 3. And we need a good way to tell employers about the workforce that's out there that they have missed. And I can tell you that they're really looking for employees and looking for employees that I think people with disabilities can fit the role for. So I'm gonna just really quickly go through a few of the things that we've achieved over the last few years. Again, we built those coalitions. We have 500 members in our coalition statewide now, and those are individuals with disabilities, family members, chambers of commerce. I'll show you that breakdown. We were able to get recommendations from those town halls into the Indiana Employment First Plan. And if you want to see more from what we pulled together in those town halls, it's on our website. So please go look around and check that out. And as the Lieutenant Governor pointed out, we developed the first ever employer toolkit and had the first Indiana Employment Awareness Campaign last October. So we have lots of information for employers, lots of great information, and lots of Hoosier-based information. And then we were able to leverage $12,000 in local funds to hold those campaigns, to have events, put billboards up, and get those things out to people. And all of our materials is customized to the communities that we're in. This is from Fort Wayne, and you can see we have a gentleman here who's working at the local transportation system, and another gentleman working at the local radio station that are highlighted along with their employers. After today, we will have had 2 summits. We will have been part of Employment First planning and oversight. We are working currently, as the Lieutenant Governor pointed out, to establish state as a model employer initiative. So the state sets goals for hiring across its system. Really excited about that. And you'll hear from our new Chief Inclusion Officer here in a second about that. We built some recommendations for funding this Employment First initiative that we have. And then finally got it started on working on a report card. So not only can we move things forward, we can see the needle move. Again, in those teams, diversity has been key. They include a number of players. This graph kind of shows you very easily that the majority of people at the table are people with disabilities and family members, and then community members, service providers, etc. So just finally, again, wanted to make sure you're aware that you can be involved in these coalitions if you're in those communities, and it's easy to figure out where they are. They're on our website, worktoinclude.org. So with that, I would like to turn this over to Kara Herring. Kara is our Chief Equity, Inclusion, and Opportunities Officer at the state, and she just recently was hired by the governor to drive inclusion and diversity in state government. So Kelsey, cue the video.
Hi there, I'm Kara Herring, and I'm honored to serve as the first Chief Equity, Inclusion, and Opportunity Officer for the state of Indiana. Since Governor Holcomb appointed me to this unique role, reporting directly to him as a member of his cabinet, we've hit the ground running, focused on improving equity, inclusion, and opportunity across your Indiana state government. I am incredibly honored to help establish this initiative for the great state of Indiana, and I feel a great responsibility to ensure we are addressing equity not just in terms of race ethnicity, but also being mindful of the multiplicity of differences amongst Hoosiers, including gender, socioeconomic status, geographic location, physical and mental ability, religion, and more. Over the course of my career, I have been committed to serving people with disabilities through my previous work as an ADA manager, helping ensure our disabled employees had suitable accommodations to ensure they could complete their jobs without barriers. And also, during my time serving as a board member for the Clubhouse of St. Joseph County, an organization that provides adults with serious mental illness hope and opportunities to reach their full potential. And finally, during my time overseeing an Office of Equity and implementing an employment program in partnership with the Clubhouse of St. Joseph County to help those adults with serious mental illness find careers and enhance their quality of life. Together with you, the state of Indiana is ensuring our workplace works for Hoosiers with disabilities and opportunities for education, workforce, and quality of life are enhanced. Thank you for gathering for this important summit. Thank you to the Governor's Council for People with Disabilities for your daily efforts. We must continue our work to enhance equity and remove barriers so all Hoosiers can experience their best quality of life right here in Indiana.
Thank Thank you so much, Susan. And we really appreciate the fact that Kara has hit the ground running and is really providing all kinds of support to our efforts. So we are going to continue and hear from various leaders in our state. And we've been so excited to link arms with all of the major advocacy organizations in Indiana so that we can move forward with one voice and in one direction. And to kick us off is Kim Dodson, who's the CEO of the ARC of Indiana. Kim, welcome.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rogan, and welcome everybody. Thank you for including the ARC of Indiana this afternoon. Very much appreciate it. I will do my best to stay within my 5-minute time frame, but it's a lot to cover in 5 minutes, which I guess is a good thing. It shows that we're doing a lot of different things. So first and foremost, the ARC is very much committed to integrated community employment and was very happy to be part of the efforts to pass Employment First legislation a few years ago. The ARC has focused a lot of our time over the last few years on education and specifically high school years for people with disabilities. We have worked hard to change the requirements on our high school diplomas, on graduation pathways, and the creation of the alternate diploma, all to make sure that as many students as possible are leaving high school with a diploma, therefore that they can check that little box on the application of a job and say that they graduated from high school. We know that this opens a lot of doors for people to get those jobs and then also go on to post-secondary education if that's what they would like to do. There were several things that the Lieutenant Governor mentioned in her address that the ARC of Indiana has been a part of, and we're very proud to work alongside her. First and foremost is the 1102 Task Force. We have been a part of that group. We were part of the Employment Array Work Group that worked very hard over the summer of 2019. It was spearheaded by Self-Advocates of Indiana, and they came up with a very long list of barriers to employment. And so now we need to get to work at eliminating those barriers, both in statute and other policies. We also have worked hard over the years in working with employers. The Lieutenant Governor mentioned Toyota specifically. We need to make sure that employers know that we are an untapped pool of employees and the benefits of hiring people with disabilities. And so we're very glad to see the work that Toyota is doing. We had a very good conversation actually this morning with IEDC that is wanting to invite more employers to hiring people with disabilities. So we're glad to be part of those efforts. In 2020 and 2021, the ARC of Indiana helped pass legislation that would require the Department of Workforce Development to contact former students who left high school without a high school diploma, again with the purpose of giving them education of what they might need to go back and earn a diploma now that they are a little bit more accessible to students receiving special education services, but also to make sure that they have access to different job training opportunities and vocational training that currently exists. I certainly cannot talk about employment without talking about the ARC's Erskine Green Training Institute. We opened in 2015. We've had over 200 graduates. More than 80% of those graduates are now working with great salaries and benefits in hospitality, food services, and healthcare. And we are very proud of our efforts taking place there. Lastly, I'll just mention the conversation currently taking place at the federal level around the elimination of 14Cs. This is a really important conversation as it's very much an antiquated practice. We are glad that the ARC of the United States is at the table with the White House and the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services, because we know that this is not a flip a switch type of initiative. We need to make sure that the capacity is built and that there are employers out there to employ people with disabilities, and quite honestly, that families and self-advocates are ready for that too. We need to make sure that families and self-advocates know that you don't always succeed in trying something for the first time. And so we need to make sure that everybody goes into this conversation with eyes wide open. We need to be working together, and we need to start trying to find ways to eliminate that practice. Lastly, I just want to apologize for moving quickly through that list of things. I wanted to try to cover as much as possible, but there's a lot of great things going on, and everybody else who's on this panel is going to talk about what they're doing, and we're glad to work with many of them. I'm going to turn it over now to Philip Parnell, who is with NARF.
Thank you, Kim. Let me just pull up my PowerPoint slide here. Can everyone see my PowerPoint? Okay, I'm seeing some head nods. That's good. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Philip Parnell. I'm the public policy analyst at NR. First, I want to just say thank you to all of the presenters who have already shared your comments. It's very inspiring to have this summit and have so many people from different organizations come together who are all supporting employment for Hoosiers with disabilities. I just wanted to share a few things from the NR perspective. So just a quick background, we are the principal membership organization in the NDA representing providers who provide services to people with disabilities, Our members serve over 50,000 Indiana citizens annually and employ nearly 15,000 workers. And for over 45 years, we have been advocating on behalf of provider agencies, and we have been providing leadership and support in the promotion of quality programs for people with disabilities, and we are committed to strengthening the system of services for individuals. We have 71 members throughout the state, and our members provide various different services such as residential services, rehabilitation services, but for this presentation, I'm going to focus on employment services. And before I wanted to jump in, I just wanted to make a few comments based on Lieutenant Governor's comments. We worked very closely with the ARC of Indiana to pass that legislation, to advocate for the passage of legislation regarding the increase of direct support professional wages. We know that the support for individuals every single day is imperative for them to get out into the community and get more employment. And to bring it back to our members and what services they provide, we have 37 members that provide VR services, and they help with job counseling, coaching, training, work experiences. We have 26 members that provide pre-employment transition services to transition-age youth, and we have 28 organizations that are certified Ability Indiana organizations, and they employ individuals with disabilities in service-oriented jobs such as janitorial and lawn work, and jobs that create products such as trash liners, gloves, and safety equipment. And so for the next couple of slides, I'm actually going to be sharing a little bit about some of the innovative practices that our members have been doing. I know the Lieutenant Governor mentioned Toyota, and so I will also be talking about that. And so it was actually one of our members, the ARC Southwest Indiana in Princeton, the ARC Southwest Indiana in Princeton, Indiana, and they have an inclusive talent pipeline with Toyota, which is a 12-week internship program with the goal of full-time job placement. And many individuals with disabilities have gone through the program, and it's been very successful, so much that Ted Brown, Vice President at Toyota, received the NR Partnership Award in 2019. We also have with New Hope of Indiana, something called Cheese and Thank You. That's actually a mac and cheese truck that New Hope of Indiana started in 2019. And so individuals working in the food truck have the opportunity to gain skills in the kitchen and marketing, customer service, and sales. Right now, it's currently on hold due to the pandemic, but we anticipate it'll be getting back up to speed in 2022. We also have the Simply Amazing Market by Opportunity Enterprises, and individuals with disabilities create popcorn, fudge, seasonal favorites, ready-to-made gift baskets, and they have a location in Meyer that also displays handmade ceramics and art. Some of the other things that our members have been doing to support employment for individuals with disabilities, hospital partnerships and project search. So members either have their own relationships with hospitals or develop them through project search initiatives. And through that, individuals are able to go into the hospital setting and work in different types of jobs with the goal through that program of full-time employment. We also have a couple of cafes, Janus Developmental Services, Inc. and ADEC, Inc. And they both have cafes where individuals with disabilities are either working as baristas or they're stocking vending machines, interacting with customers, etc. We have Noble has a partnership with Eli Lilly and Company for recycling cardboard, which is great for the environment as well as for individuals with disabilities. And there's a Mr. Canary Bird Feeder Company, which partners with the ARC of Greater Boone County for the creation of the bird feeders. The individuals at the ARC of Greater Boone County create them, and it partners with Bosma Enterprises for warehousing and shipping. Lastly, I just wanted to talk a little bit about commissions and work groups. As the Lieutenant Governor mentioned, the Task Force for Assessment of Services and Supports for People with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, also known as the 1102 Task Force. NARF was certainly a member of that task force and provided feedback. And as part of the task force, as Kim mentioned as well, the employment array work group was tasked specifically with determining how to get past these barriers to employment for individuals with disabilities. And we participated on that, as well as the Commission on Rehabilitation Services in collaboration with Vocational Rehabilitation, the Employment First Subcommittee, the Employment Advisory Group, and the Transition Advisory Council. So again, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time, and NARF appreciates being able to be part of this summit. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kathy Robinson. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Robinson, and I am the director for Indiana's Bureau of Developmental Disability Services. And I'm likewise thrilled to have the opportunity to talk to you all today about some things that are happening within our bureau. Really engaged in most recently a number of efforts to address, I think, that speak to specifically some of the recommendations in the Employment First plan. And so I'll probably spend most of my time just highlighting a couple of those critical projects and initiatives for BEADS. But I want to just let everybody know, in case you aren't familiar, BEADS operates and administers home and community-based services through two Medicaid waivers, and that's the Family Support Waiver and the Community Integration and Habilitation Waiver. And we are at this point serving over 30,000 people every year in our services, and we also administer our intermediate care facilities in Indiana, or group homes. So I just want to talk about a couple of these areas that I think are pertinent as far as the conversation as it relates to employment. Really, several areas of recommendations, I think, from that Employment First plan are related to BEAD services and supports. However, one of the largest areas of enhancement and improvement that we have prioritized that relate to those recommendations is really associated with our ability to collect data. BEADS has been, some of you may or may not know, operating the same case management IT system application since the mid-90s. Some of you may remember what you were doing in the mid-90s. That system has not been upgraded or significantly enhanced in many years. For us, that really has created some significant barriers to us collecting appropriate, relevant information, particularly as it relates to capturing data associated with individuals in our services who are working toward or have achieved competitive integrated employment outcomes. We struggle to even today to actually accurately capture whether or not someone is working and if the goals they have set for themselves are truly reflective of their desire to have a job. And so that's a critical piece for us. So this fall, we are scheduled to deploy a new IT system for BEADS, and with that, the ability to add or enhance our existing methods of data collection to truly capture those elements that we could use to inform our BEADS program and determine some of those effective strategies and approaches to see progress or change over time. So I think for us, a really critical piece is just getting ourselves in a place where we have the system capacity and functionality to meet our business needs, but recognizing that those needs have changed over the years, and really wanting to be able to more pointedly capture and record these employment elements or data pieces so that we have a better sense of what are the needs of the individuals in our support systems, what is it that they want to see for their life, and how can we support them in that and all of the services and supports that we offer, but also are there additional or different services that we need to be thinking about or introducing into the service array to help support those outcomes. So moving away from the data piece, we are also working this year to restructure our case management supports offered through BEADS. And this is referred to as the Case Management Innovation Project. It does involve us moving to a selective contracting procurement process to identify case management entities who will partner with BEADS and DDRS in coordinating training needs for case managers, as this has been a pretty prominent, consistent area of stakeholder feedback where individuals and families would like to see a consistency in the delivery of this critical service and more training for case managers. For us, this provides an opportunity for us to better align training outcomes and focus as it relates to employment goals, supporting individuals' employment outcomes, and just really consistently capturing related steps and activities that would be associated with an individual's journey toward competitive integrated employment. So I'm very excited about the potential that restructuring has and our ability to more closely partner and coordinate with case management entities on what some of those training components for case managers look like, so they can be positioned to really fully support individuals who are wanting to work toward their employment goals, and what kinds of supports in case management system navigation do they need to be able to accomplish that. So as we move down the implementation path for both of these projects, we will continue to look for stakeholder and partner input and suggestions with regard to just how we can continue to support our current efforts, but also continued evaluation of just our effectiveness in making progress and other related recommendations going forward. That's really all I have to share. With that, I will pass it over to Michael Barnes with Department of Workforce Development.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. And I'm really pleased to be here celebrating the Employment First Summit. And I want to kind of talk about DWD in our terms of how we support and how we integrate with this. So first as an employer, and then more as a service provider, and then how we are a partner and advocate for people with disabilities. So first, as an employer, we are undergoing several new diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts at the agency to ensure that we are making opportunities available to people with disabilities. And, we've over the last 2 years really come to realize that equal opportunity is not enough if we want to be serious about a more diverse and inclusive workplace. And so we're redoubling our efforts in that area. Another significant area as an employer, we have about 42 positions around the state, which are called Disabled Veterans Outreach Placement Specialists, or we call them DVOPs. And they are specifically targeted to work with veterans with disabilities and provide them case management services and employment activities to the veteran community. And so we're able to learn a lot from those individuals and how we can apply those lessons learned to the rest of our service delivery. And that's my next area, is that as a service provider, we operate along with our regional partners, the Work One centers across the state. I think there's about 75 points of service around the state. And the Work Ones provide information to people with disabilities and their families in order that they can make more informed choices about employment options and pathways to work. Another important program that we run is our JAG program, which is Jobs for America's Graduates. And DWD provides pre-ETS to students with disabilities in our JAG programs. And we have an MOU with DDRS, and they help provide funding for that. DWD has enhanced the JAG program curriculum at existing program sites to include a more targeted focus on work-based learning activities and instruction in self-advocacy, to include peer monitoring as the core JAG curriculum currently does not adequately address these two activities. The next area that I want to highlight is our employer services and how we work as a partner with vocational rehabilitation through our business services teams. And we work with the VR business service team and other partners to ensure that we promote with employers statewide the advantages of hiring members of diverse backgrounds to include persons with disabilities. This includes developing employment services and supports for competitive and integrated employment. And then a couple of other really quick areas that we provide support. DWD operates the processing of the Worker Opportunity Tax Credit, which Indiana underutilizes. And for those of you that are not familiar, the WOTC credit gives a tax credit to employers that hire people from certain categories of employment. And one of those is persons with disabilities. And another area that we can add support is through our federal bonding program. And so that program will help, it can provide bonding to individuals to help ensure that employers feel more comfortable about hiring people that may have disabilities or other past work histories. So with that, I am going to turn it over to, looks like, sorry, I didn't have this, Tracy at the Department of Education. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for that. This is Tracy Hackelman. I'm the Assistant Director of Special Education at the Indiana Department of Education. And I hope you're seeing my slides here. Anyway, I want to talk about transition planning today. So transition planning is mandated by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act for all students who have IEPs. What that means in Indiana is that transition planning must start by age 14 or by 9th grade, whichever comes first. And as an interesting side note, the IDA requires that you start this by age 16. So here in Indiana, we're actually starting this process or mandating this process 2 years earlier than what's federally required. Transition planning must be individualized. It must be based on the student's strengths, preferences, and interests, and include opportunities to develop functional skills for work and community life. This dovetails very nicely with the Employment First Plan Focus Area 3, promoting effective school to careers transition. The vision for that focus area is that transition services in schools support youth to prepare for life after high school and access services so they leave high school employed or enrolled in post-secondary or career technical education. So how are we doing as a state? Well, our office currently provides annual training across the state on best practices for transition IEPs, and we offer an asynchronous course developed by the Indiana Secondary Transition Resource Center, or INSTRIC, that's available year-round for teachers. We've created a pilot study in conjunction with Voc Rehab to foster collaboration between schools and pre-ETS providers. We have been nationally recognized for our regional transition cadres. There are 7 cadres of transition leaders across the state. Cadre meetings are attended by traditional public schools, charter schools, parent resource centers, and pre-ETS providers. So because we work with parent resource centers and that, we're kind of getting towards that focus area number 6, which increases parent and community involvement. We've also been working to develop a pilot program in collaboration with Voc Rehab and the Governor's Workforce Cabinet to expand career and technical education opportunities for students with complex support needs. We've been providing information and training to teachers of records on alternatives to guardianship, assisting youth and families on how to ask about types of employment services, setting up ABLE accounts, selecting adult service providers, and other areas of need for transitioning to life after high school. We also assist school districts in developing partnerships with local businesses to provide a variety of workplace experiences throughout a student's time in school. We have a full-time specialist devoted to the area of transition, and that is Michelle Oja. So if you have any questions on this topic, you can reach out to Michelle or myself. And I thank you for your time. Now I'll hand it over to Teresa Colazar with Vocational Rehab.
Thank you. And I'm going to be pretty informal today. I'm just going to chat. I'm bouncing over from another presentation. So thanks for letting me scooch in here at the end of the session. I'm just going to share a couple of things. One is from the Voc Rehab perspective. And by the way, for those who may not know me, I'm Teresa Colazar, the director of the Bureau of Rehabilitation Services, or BRS, which houses Indiana's vocational rehabilitation program, blind services, deaf services, and we are also the designated state liaison agency for Centers for Independent Living around the state. And so we have a federally mandated council called the Commission on Rehabilitation Services. And many of you may know they have been charged with developing an Employment First plan in line with the Employment First legislation that passed in 2017. That plan is online. I'm sure there'll be a link somewhere throughout the 3-day presentation. And if not, I'm happy to pop it in the chat box so you can look at the Employment First plan the Commission has adopted. And right now the Commission is focused and definitely in partnership with the Work to Include group on communicating about the Employment First plan. Those of us who are very close to it, of course, know all about it and all about Employment First and legislation. But those stakeholders and agencies and general public that aren't that close to it may not yet be looped in yet quite yet. So communication is a big next step. And as one puzzle piece of that communication, we have recently, in partnership with our division director, Kylie Hope, have pulled together a group of state agency upper level leadership together about a week and a half ago. Mid-May or so, pulled together state agency leadership to educate about the legislation and the purpose and the requirements, especially as they impact those state agencies and the services that they provide. I also want to give a little update around some of the efforts that we have made over the last, probably year and a half, 2 years or so in vocational rehabilitation to really hone in on inclusive service delivery, recognizing that while everybody we serve has a disability, we also have a lot of other diversity that is very relevant and present within the disability population that we serve in terms of sexual orientation, racial and ethnic minority groups, cultural, religious, socioeconomic status, geographic location, all of those factors which really make up a very diverse population that we serve. Folks with criminal history, folks using substances, the list of course goes on. And so we've been taking a look at a lot of our practices and our procedures, and that's a long process that will continue doing that process. But thus far, we've made some pretty substantial revisions to a couple specific practices that we think perhaps were not placing us in an as equitable of a position as we could be, and maybe we're feeding into some biases and stigma that we all, whether we realize it or not, that we all have. So just as a couple of examples, we've made some pretty significant revisions to our practices around serving folks who are using substances or have a history of substance use, really to just break down any restrictions and barriers to those individuals receiving services, not automatically assuming that substance use in and of itself is a barrier or requires treatment, that is a very individualized determination based on the nature of the use, the job goal that the person is seeking, and it may not ultimately be a barrier at all, and then therefore not something we really need to intervene in, really moving us closer to that zero exclusion approach. If someone wants to work, then we should be responsive to helping them work and not put up barriers or extra steps that people may need to go through. We've also loosened up our restrictions around using VR dollars to support short-term treatment if treatment is needed. So again, not automatically assuming that it is, but if that is something that somebody is wanting and they don't have another source for that, VR dollars can now be used for that purpose. We've also really honed in on services to folks with mental health conditions. Of course, in VR, we serve a wide disability population, folks with physical, mental health, intellectual, sensory, deafblind, traumatic brain injury, so on and so on, any type of disability that causes barriers to working. But we recognize in looking at our data over the last few years that we are not as effective in helping those with mental health conditions, specifically with employment. And so we've really been much more intentional in arming our staff and our providers with training around serving that population. And then finally, I'll just say that we've also revised our practices around meeting WIOA or Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act requirements for youth who are seeking employment at sub-minimum wage. So gosh, there's so much to say about that. I'll try to be quick. So for those youth, so up through age 24 that believe that they want to work in Indiana, we typically refer to them as a sheltered workshop, but ultimately in a segregated setting where they're earning less than minimum wage, they have to now complete under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act that was passed a few years ago. They have to complete certain prerequisites before they are able to enter sub-minimum wage employment. And of course, the spirit of that is to make sure that they can truly make an informed choice about their employment pathway. And we have now translated that through our updated approach to carrying out those requirements. We've been carrying out the requirements for several years now, but we felt that we could be a little more robust and intentional in carrying out those requirements to better meet the spirit of those requirements. They aren't there just to be extra steps or roadblocks. They are there truly to make sure people can make an informed, not just a choice, but an informed choice. And I firmly believe people, all of us, myself included, we need at least two very important things to make an informed choice. And one of those is comprehensive and robust information. And the other one is experience, being able to feel that, spit that on and see how you think you might like that. So it's hard to know you don't want something if you have not experienced it, right? And so we've identified places within that process of helping someone to meet those requirements to make sure there are opportunities to share information about all of the different supports that would be available to help someone with employment in a community or competitive integrated setting, and then also access to actual experience in those competitive integrated settings through job shadowing and work experiences, work-based learning, and so on and so on. So we rolled out that more robust process in October. And so hopefully we will see that more individuals will, I think it's kind of fun actually to do some of that career exploration and try out some different jobs. So hopefully we'll see more people engaged in that, and then really making more informed decisions and having a better understanding of what all of the options are that are in front of them. And I will go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you.
That's fantastic, Teresa. Thanks so much. And wrapping up this section of the summit is Kelsey Linville from DMHA. Kelsey.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I am the Bureau Chief for Adults with Mental Illness and Co-occurring Disorders with the Indiana Division of Mental Health and Addiction, or DMHA. So very big thanks to the Work to Include Coalition for putting together such a fantastic event and for allowing time for state agencies to fill you in on what we've been doing. I'm going to very briefly share with you the foundational why of our efforts, what we've accomplished in the last year or so, and what we're planning for the year ahead. Gainful employment is a social determinant of health. It has the potential to contribute to positive emotional and general health for people with serious mental illness. Unemployment is detrimental to overall wellness. We know that the majority of people with serious mental illness want to work. Nationally, approximately 2/3 of people with mental illness want to work. However, just 15% are actually employed. And of those, just 2% of those who want to work have access to employment services to help them obtain and maintain employment. A review of the available Indiana-specific data from DMHA and vocational rehabilitation reflects that individuals with serious mental illness served in each agency. Of those individuals, approximately 25% are competitively employed, either full or part-time, which of course leaves approximately 75% who are not employed. So clearly we have our work cut out for us to improve outcomes for this population. So DMHA and vocational rehabilitation have been working collaboratively to address this issue. In December of 2019, we received the Voice Training and Technical Assistance Award from the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Economic Policy, Employment Policy, or ODEP. VOICE stands for Visionary Opportunities to Increase Competitive Employment. Indiana received 300 subject matter hours to use through much of 2020. With that award, we were able to focus on the central message that employment is a health intervention. Employment leads to better health, unemployment leads to poor health and social disconnection. Research shows that people with mental health diagnoses lose 10 to 25 years of life from modifiable health conditions. And the fastest and most efficient way to help people with serious mental illness get and keep jobs is by using the evidence-based practice of individual placement and support, or IPS. So we produced a video training series that is housed on a new website with information about ongoing efforts to improve employment outcomes for this population. The videos include personal stories from individuals with lived experience of a mental health and/or substance use disorder, topics such as stigma, employment as a social determinant of health, benefits, and more. We held a training and follow-up conversation for community mental health center staff to introduce them to IPS and begin to unpack the core principles of the model. Also through the VOICE project, we began to do preliminary work on exploring funding structures to support the implementation of IPS within Indiana. Fast forward to this year, and we were awarded another training and technical assistance grant through ODEP, which is the ASPIRE project, Advancing State Policy Integration for Recovery and Employment. This project allows us to take our work through the VOICE project to the next level by focusing specifically on how to implement IPS in our state through an early adopter approach. We are again connected with national subject matter experts on aspects such as funding, IPS training and fidelity, agency collaboration, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. DMHA has released a request for funding in collaboration with VR to fund up to 4 community mental health centers who would like to serve as early adopter sites. That RFF is currently live with proposals due June 14th. The term of the award will go from October 1st of this year through February of 2023. Awardees will work collaboratively with DMHA, VR, and our subject matter experts who are provided through Westat, the contracted research firm for the project, to create a feedback loop that will allow us to align policy and funding structures as we work towards scalability and sustainability of IPS in Indiana. So we look forward to the work that is ahead. A lot of the foundation has already been laid, and we're getting ready to move into the really exciting part of seeing some of that work come to fruition. So we appreciate the opportunity to share. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. And thanks to each and every one of our state leaders. How exciting is that? We are really poised to leap forward, as you heard each and every one of the speakers address competitive and integrated employment, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that investment in professional development, that investment in aligning our policies and practices, that investment in data collection and analysis to track our progress. Fantastic. So many kudos and thank you to each and every one for all that you're doing, fantastic. You may be peeking into the chat room right now, and you'll see that Susan posted the link to our Employment First plan for any of you who would like to access that and download it. And also you'll see kudos to Kelsey for juggling her role as a mama of a darling young sweetheart and wearing her professional hat as well. So lovely, each and every one of you. Thank you so much. And if you need to, by the way, increase the font size in your chat room, you can personally do that by going to your settings and making that adjustment. So without further ado, I am so excited to introduce our first featured national speaker as part of our summit. And I want to welcome Julie Christensen, who is the Director of Policy and Advocacy, as well as the Interim Executive Director of the Association of People Supporting Employment First, or APSE. Our national APSE organization is the premier advocacy organization in the country for supporting employment for individuals with disabilities. Julie is currently serving also as the Senior Disability Policy Advisor for the Harkin Institute, which is at Drake University. And prior to joining APSE, Dr. Christensen was the director of the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, or UCED, at the University of Iowa, where she held a research faculty appointment in the Carver College of Medicine Department of Psychiatry. Julie, we are so happy to have you with us to speak about Employment First. Welcome.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. And I do want to reiterate the shout out to all of the working parents. And I am amazed at the under 5 population that have a much more robust CV or resume of national meetings like this. And so, you know, parents get those written down and have them go into kindergarten with that. They're getting great exposure. So it really is amazing if there's an upside to the COVID world that I know has been really challenging for many of us. I'm going to share my screen real quick. And what I was asked to do was give kind of a 30,000 foot view of what's going on in federal policy as we continue to work to advance competitive integrated employment. And I'm going to keep my comments relatively brief because you have Bob Lawhead about to hop on and talk to you about what's going on in the state of Colorado, which really is such an exciting effort to watch. And so I'm going to try and set the stage a little bit in terms of what's happening federally as it relates to the work that is happening both in Indiana, in Colorado, and around the country. But there are a couple things federally that are helpful to know in terms of context. So just very quickly I never assume that we all speak the same language or have the same definitions. But when we're talking about advancing competitive integrated employment as defined in WIOA, it's really 3 separate concepts of work that many of us have been part of, sometimes integrated, sometimes not. But what WIOA did that really was a game changer was said that we have to think about competitive integrated employment as the gold standard, the path that we're working towards. And so I happen to be a visual person, so bear with me that the way that I find it helpful to talk about competitive integrated employment is to kind of do the opposite of what I just said, break it back into silos to understand what we mean by the components, and then take it broad and think about, then how do we do this? Because it's a lot. There is a lot that's being asked. In thinking about this. And so, from National APSE's perspective, we really conceptualize the competitive piece of CIE as the minimum wage discussion. If you're working, if you are a taxpayer, if you are, all of those things, you should be paid the same, at least the federal minimum wage. the integrated part, the setting in which your employment is happening. Is it in a segregated setting? Is it in an inclusive setting? And obviously we, are all here because we are well aware of the ongoing discrepancy in the labor participation rate for people with disabilities. So we have some data to kind of give us a sense of where we're at. I want to just quickly caveat the data you're seeing here in relation to competitive wages. What we're talking about specifically here is 14C, and I just want to be clear about that as we get into the federal policy discussion, that 14C is the exemption under Fair Labor Standards, the Fair Labor Standards Act, that allows people with disabilities to be paid a sub-minimum wage. That is a different conversation than stipends or other forms of compensation that somebody might be receiving through Medicaid-funded pre-vocational programs or other types of internships or different programs that operate around the country. And so 14C APSE is very clear in our language of what we're talking about. You see here the most recent, the April data of 564 active participants serving 37,000 people, but I'm going to caveat that as well because our data for 14C is flawed. We know right now there are about 600 pending certificates. And so we're extrapolating that at this point, we're looking at about 77,000 people remaining in 14C. It has steadily declined. Going back to really 2015, and a lot of that is because of the push of WIOA and the focus on competitive integrated employment. So when we think about kind of a policy approach to this, again, kind of staying in those silos, but how do we think about this? And I will say, National APSE, we work across the continuum. States, however, are focusing on different pieces and parts because that's the reality of state culture, of state funding, all those pieces and parts. And so I know, Bob is going to tell you his story about how Colorado has gone about this, and you have your own story in Indiana. But, when we're thinking about competitive employment, we're thinking about removing that elimination of, or eliminating that 14C piece of the Fair Labor Standards Act. We're talking about really transforming the Ability One program, not the same thing as saying the Ability One program is bad. Those two things don't equate. There is a huge amount of money and job opportunities within the federal procurement system, but people with disabilities need to be compensated a fair wage in order to participate in those jobs. When we think about the integrated piece of it, we're really looking at full implementation of WIOA, compliance with the HCBS final rule. So that's the Medicaid home and community-based settings. And then there's so many pieces and parts to just addressing barriers to employment, everything from incentives to businesses to addressing asset limits, the role of the ABLE Act. There are all these pieces and parts that play in, but just gives you a little bit of a roadmap. So federally, there is work happening in all of these areas. And I'm just going to give a quick highlight. In your state, where you have momentum, and that puts you right there on the track towards achieving competitive integrated employment and being part of the broader employment first movement. Our legislative priorities as a national organization are to phase out 14C and subminimum wage, to address the workforce crisis, which has become even more dire as a result of COVID-19, really focusing on implementation of existing law and regulatory guidance and rules that are out there that has been difficult to do during a pandemic, but we need to be pushing forward in implementing what we have and promoting ABLE expansion. So I have a list here and I shared the slides. These are the bills that are currently introduced that APSE is supporting, and I'm not going to go into the specifics of each of them other than to just kind of connect a couple of the dots that as we move forward. So we're really happy that there is work being done on the ABLE Age Adjustment Act and looking at expanding the age range of when folks can participate. There's a number of avenues for phasing out 14C that we'll talk about. There's the Disability Employment Incentive Act, which has a number of different tax incentives and other pieces for business. And also the American Rescue Plan, which is the bigger discussion that is taking place in the country in terms of recovering from COVID, what that means for the workforce. And really, we're in such a great position in having this is not a political statement, but just the reality of having an administration right now in our federal government that has specifically prioritized people with disabilities as being part of workforce recovery. And so that's something we need to build on and really take that opportunity that's been given to us and run with it. So let me say a little bit about where we're at now, which is it's a lot of hurry up and wait. So if you are in any way, shape, or form following the news, all things in Washington, D.C. are about infrastructure. So we have two packages right now that are being considered, the American Jobs Plan and the Families Plan. Combined, it's about a $4 trillion package. That obviously is not what's going to be law because there's multiple steps that have to be taken. But what it does do is communicate the priorities of the administration. And that really is the key piece. The bar has been set very high by the White House in terms of the role of people with disabilities in our society, in our communities, as part of the workforce, as part of families, as part of what our healthcare infrastructure needs to consider. And that's really good news. So there's a number of things that have been proposed, including the big piece that we're working in coalition on is the $400 billion investment in home and community-based services for seniors and for individuals with disabilities. Now that's only the Medicaid system, so that's just a piece of the pie when we talk about people with disabilities. But a lot of other really cool nuggets in the package that has been proposed that speaks to job creation in rural and tribal communities, areas that we know people with disabilities have disproportionately just not had access to services and supports that promote their participation in the workforce, and seeing that connection with disability there. Thinking about broadband infrastructure and expansion, we've seen so many new opportunities for people with disabilities as we've opened up work from home as a norm, which for a long time in disability employment, we've been arguing should be a reasonable accommodation. So, there's a lot in here that we can work with as we move forward. However, we're a little bit stalled, and so that is the reality. And because of that, everything else in terms of disability employment policy is also on hold. Infrastructure needs to be addressed first for a number of reasons, and then some of the other bills that I put up on the slide earlier, we can figure out what the path is to move forward. Right now, the DC mantra is that everything needs to be done in a bipartisan way. President Biden specifically has said your marching orders are to achieve bipartisan compromise. That being said, there's a difference in opinion on what that looks like functionally, and is part of the reason that we still are kind of in a holding pattern about what this ultimate package is going to look like moving forward. However, there are some things that we know, and again, APSE is a nonpartisan organization. I personally am happy to self-disclose that I am a proud independent, which means that I am a critic and cheerleader of both sides of the aisle. It's all about what are the policy goals we're working towards, and are we making progress? That being said, the Democrats right now are in control of the House and the Senate. So when we think about Congress's response to the infrastructure package, it right now is democratically led. And a couple of things that they have put focus on in terms of what they can get accomplished that does not require bipartisan agreement through the budget reconciliation process. So we are fully anticipating that a surface infrastructure package is going to move forward. That's your typical infrastructure, the bridges, the roads. That's the easy part to negotiate in this broader package. What the Biden administration has done is expand the definition of infrastructure to include caretaking, to include services for senior citizens and people with disabilities, to include broadband. I think I glossed over it, but there's also $2 billion in the infrastructure package to phase out 14C. So they're piecing out what can happen through budget reconciliation, and they're going to try and get that stuff done. And then the work will begin over the summer months to try to negotiate the rest of it. We know that 14C will not move through budget reconciliation. That's not actually technically possible, but there are some exciting things that they're working on in terms of Social Security reform that can move through budget reconciliation, that are not by any way, shape, or form the broad level of updating, shall we say, to Social Security laws that we all need to happen, but at least are opportunities to make some progress. So things like raising that monthly maximum, removing the asset limits, removing marriage penalties. These are things that there is actually many of these things, there's bipartisan support, but they have figured out how to get that done regardless of bipartisan support. So we'll be talking more about this in the coming weeks as we know more about the mechanisms that these will move forward. So unfortunately, that's kind of the 30,000 foot view of what needs to be figured out. In the meantime, under the auspices of bipartisanship as well, WIOA is up for reauthorization, and it is moving forward. So I wanted to put that out on the table to kind of frame discussions. I know you guys are going to have some breakout opportunities this afternoon, and so being aware of just kind of the context and the pieces and parts of how this all works out, I think is going to be really critical. There is huge bipartisan support for taking on comprehensive workforce reform. That is an absolute given. I think the disability advocacy community had different ideas of how to go about that than where we're at now, but here is where we're at. So both the House and Senate have announced intent to move forward. The House is saying that they have no intention to address Title IV of WIOA, which is the Rehab Act portion of WIOA. The Senate, however, says that that's a no-go. If you open WIOA, you open WIOA, and has pushed back to the disability community to say you're going to have to compromise. To which APSE has said, yeah, no, too early in the game to ask us to compromise. Our position on this has been and continues to be that we as a national organization oppose reauthorization right now. It's not a perfect bill. There's no such thing. But we haven't had time to fully implement, exacerbated by the pandemic. We haven't had a lot of opportunity for oversight and accountability at a global level. Because of that, not only have we not achieved full implementation of WIOA, but we can't even begin to break down from a data approach what works and what doesn't in order to be able to put forward recommendations for how to improve the existing law. So instead, our, out the gate, APSE's position was we would like to do more oversight, look at other measures to take on pieces and parts of what is problematic within WIOA, much of which can be done from a regulatory perspective and does not require reopening the entire law. But that's all moot because we are moving forward. So given that, APSE's current position is this: we are going to take the House at their word and really push on the Senate that we are opposing changes to Title IV. That was a hard fought battle to get to the level of robust disability-specific legislation that was hugely bipartisan back in 2014, and we've only scratched the surface in being able to implement it. So we oppose any changes because we support the definition of competitive integrated employment, we support PREETs, and we support the continued limitations around Section 511. There is not agreement on this, which is why Title IV is a potential on the Senate side, and a lot of concerns in particular, I would say, around pre-employment transition services and the difficulty that some states and local areas have had in implementation of PREETs. From APSE's perspective, and understand as a national organization, we look globally. It is not, I think, it is not a coincidence that the states that have phased out 14C on their own are also the states that have figured out how to implement PREETs well. And I think that's a question we have to really talk about. at what level do some of these systems that we say, oh yeah, but we're offering choice, and all, how easy is it to continue to move people with disabilities towards something other than competitive integrated employment if that option is available? And we're seeing pockets. Oregon is a state I would highly recommend that folks dig into in terms of the ways that they have both phased out 14C, ended that pipeline from school to workshop, and simultaneously found some really innovative ways to do pre-ETS programming that is making a significant impact. In the meantime, we are going to push to say that, disability in the space of employment is not only a Title IV discussion, and that we want to see more inclusive language in the other titles of WIOA to include people with disabilities with much more intentionality than we currently have. So where does that leave 14C? We're not sure. So the Raise the Wage Act is still on the books. Technically, that's the $15 minimum wage bill, the broader package that also includes a phase out of 14C. I mentioned the $2 billion set aside that is in the Biden plan, but again, can't be done through budget reconciliation. So that's unlikely to move forward on its own. Instead, what we think is more likely is that the Transformation to Competitive Integrated Employment Act, which has been reintroduced in the House and is slated to be introduced in the Senate in 2 weeks, is going to be the primary mechanism to move 14C forward. That being said, WIOA reauthorization changes the scope of the conversation, and there are beginning discussions about how Section 511 within WIOA currently already sets some limitations, and do we attach 14C phase out to the reauthorization of WIOA? So that's a whole can of worms I just opened up, and I have no answers other than we're asking a lot of questions and listening to as many people as we can. I did want to say, though, that 13 states across the country have introduced 14C phase out legislation at the state level this year, 2021. Washington State's bill passed, which makes them the 6th state in the country to phase out 14C as a state. Hawaii's bill passed both in the House and the Senate and is kind of in limbo, waiting for the governor to do something with it. And I'm going to let Bob talk about Colorado. But eyes on Colorado. Every morning, I have an alert to my phone that tells me if anything has happened on Colorado's 14C bill. But there also were some other states doing really cool work in this area. And so that is exciting, just in, really envisioning a world where people with disabilities are the only protected class under civil rights laws who have an exemption from the federal minimum wage under our labor laws. And if you think about it from that perspective, put in any other protected class, and I'll let you think about which one you want to insert, and say, we are going to put an exclusion to say that this subgroup of people protected under civil rights laws do not have access to federal minimum wage. We would not accept it, and we should not accept it for people with disabilities either. Lots of state legislative efforts that we're tracking, and so that's all there for you to take a look at. And for those who are so inclined, the amazing Tina Skeel is Indiana's policy committee liaison for the APSE Indiana chapter, and keeps me on my toes. Well, let me tell you, I love Tina's involvement. But we do, for APSE members, we have a monthly meeting to talk about federal policy. We have added on a second meeting to focus on state policy. Really, it's an informal agenda and an opportunity for states to network with each other around policy initiatives at the state level, where they just kind of want to talk peer to peer. How have you done this? How have you done this? So that's happening as well. We do have a policy committee Facebook group, action alerts, all those things. And starting in July, we're going to be adding the day after our monthly federal policy committee meeting, we're going to be adding a kind of recap meeting to answer questions and break down language, just as in an effort to make sure that we are being as accessible as we possibly can in getting information out to people who need that, whether that's somebody who happens to be a self-advocate or a family member, or someone who is not, but just doesn't live in the weeds of policy every day like I do because I'm a dork, and really has an interest and is passionate about moving issues forward, but might just want to ask some more questions and doesn't feel comfortable doing it on the policy committee when you have the David Hoffs of the world who are very wonky. And I can pick on David because he allows me to. So, shameless self-promotion alert. If you haven't already, our national conference, which sadly is virtual, is coming up in a couple of weeks. It's going to be amazing. Really good speakers. And just another little shameless plug as I set up Bob to tell the amazing story of Colorado. We are super, super excited to return to some sense of normalcy in face-to-face APSE conferences, which is kind of like summer camp for many of us, in Colorado, in Denver in 2022. So with that, contact information, and Bob, I'm going to let you tell the real story of how the work gets done.
Julie, thank you so much. That was amazing. And talk about a sense of building momentum and, the urgency of the time. The time is now. And that was an invitation to involvement and action and advocacy on each and every one of our parts. So yes, Bob Lawhead is here. We are so excited to have Bob, and I'd love to tell you a little bit about him. Julie, thank you. That was amazing. So Bob Lawhead serves as policy advisor for the Colorado Developmental Disabilities Council, advocating in collaboration with people with developmental disabilities for systems change and promoting independence, productivity, and inclusion for people with disabilities. Bob led Community Link, a nonprofit agency supporting the inclusion of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities for 30 years. And he's only 35. Bob is past president of the National Association Supporting Employment First, or APSE, and serves on APSE's Public Policy Committee and is Colorado APSE's Public Policy Chair. He also presently serves as co-chair of Colorado's Employment First Implementation Panel. Bob and his wife, Anastasia, have a son, Jess, who experiences Down syndrome and who graduated from high school where he was included in regular classes. Jess has recently been hired by a local pizzeria and is living on his own, in his own home. So Bob, welcome. So nice to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Pat. And thank you, Julie. That was a wonderful presentation at the national level that certainly exhibits some of the opportunities and challenges that we're going to have here in the coming months. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And okay. So this is really lessons learned about the legislative effort that we've had in Colorado over the last 5 years to promote employment first. I can tell you, and I think many people are aware of this, but I can tell you that systems change never occurs as rapidly as we may have thought. I know when we were changing over our agency from a sheltered workshop to a supported employment organization, I did a 5-year plan, and it took me fully 8 years to implement the darn thing because it just is challenging to change these systems and to change these organizations that have been doing this for such a very long time. I always like to put up this particular picture because I continue to feel that it takes all of us at the grassroots level working together and working with allies, and also working with people who may not be characterized as our allies, to get this work done and to really move forward in this area. So And I am older than 35, Pat, just to clarify. I'd like to let you know that we feel like we came to critical mass in 2015 because we had a long history, and by we, I really mean Colorado APSE and the Colorado Developmental Disabilities Council, in trying to expand access to supported employment. As we came to 2015, we were at a point where we even had service providers who were ready to take a look at trying to move forward with changing the system and in moving us forward. And part of the reason for that, at least, was that we had a history of that. We had been quite successful as a state in the 90s, where we had achieved over 50% of all individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in community employment. And the funding changed in 96 through 98, and we backslid, quite frankly. We couldn't maintain that level of movement toward implementing competitive integrated employment and supported employment. So the last slide was why now, and so I tried to provide a little background. When you've been in the field as long as I have, and it's been, golly, 45 years, I think, I get to show off my son a little bit. So this is my son, Jess. He was just employed last year at Cosmos Pizza, and he really appreciates the fact that he can spend his money on video and on music. And I think that's pretty typical for many young men and women as far as that goes. But he also takes a great deal of pride in the job that he's doing. This is something that he's been building up to for many, many years. And in fact, his mother and I, Anastasia and I, were told that he might be able to do a volunteer job when he gets older. More likely, he will be in some kind of a segregated day program doing community-based other kinds of activities. But I am pleased to say that that is not the case, and that he is working at Cosmos. He just went back 2 weeks ago after being on furlough because of the pandemic. And this, of course, I must admit, is one of the biggest turn-ons for Jess, is that big slice of pizza. So, as I said, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we were able over the last 5 years to pass a variety of pieces of legislation that put us on the right track. Now, I can tell you right now, we're working with you. We're working with Indiana right now to develop a better data tracking system, outcome data system. And so are looking back to you folks to do a better job of that, because of course, without data, you got nothing. But this started in 2016, it started in 2015, but we got the legislation passed in 2016. The legislative declaration hit a number of areas. One was the value of work for everyone. And those of us who were pushing hard for this really believed that brought people who may not have experience with disability or direct experience with disability into the fold. Structural barriers were obvious. We basically were talking about using best practice, which was not being used consistently in the state, to make sure that all people had access to employment. So just as in many states, Colorado's VR system basically decided that people were ineligible if they had a significant disability. And we wanted to change that. And the only way you change that, in my mind at least, is that you go ahead and make sure that you're using best practice so you can prove that individuals like my son can be employed in community settings. We talked about Olmstead compliance. And of course, in 2015, 2016, the WIOA had just been passed and the final settings rule had just been put out there, both in 2014. And so we had those to look at and to say, golly, things are changing. It's time for Colorado to change as well. in amendment, as the bill went through, we added a piece in the legislative declaration about free market principles, and that's always helpful to bring on a broader base of supporters. So work matters to all of us. You all know this, I'm sure, but we were trying to connect the fact that relationships are important. Relationships are built through work, and this directly impacts our health and well-being, particularly on the mental health side. I think we've all learned that during the pandemic here. We did emphasize ADA and Olmstead and basically said that this is a civil rights issue. This is an issue where we are trying to make sure that there's equal protection under the law. And we do, of course, have the ADA, which was further clarified by the Supreme Court's Olmstead ruling in 1999, and the right to be served in the most integrated setting. In other words, segregation is no longer legal. It's illegal. And of course, all the states are struggling with this. I don't know of any state that's perfect in this area yet, but again, in trying to put this forth at the state level, we basically were saying, and mentioned this a number of times to people, that we do not want a lawsuit like we've seen in Rhode Island or Oregon or other states where they've not complied with the integration law. I like to talk about Clarence Miller because this guy presented with me around the country at APSI, at TASH, and basically was, because he had experienced 3 different sheltered workshops, was such a strong advocate for moving Colorado forward. And he's passed now, but this is a quote: "I'm sick and tired of people trying to put me in sheltered workshops. Olmstead says people with disabilities have a right to work in the community, and so should I. This is ridiculous." Chester Finn also made a statement in 2010, and this links our efforts again to the civil rights movement. Other groups fighting for their civil rights would not stand for separate places, and neither should we. So these are the primary legislative points that we put into the first bill. It was entitled Employment First for Persons with Disabilities. It was Senate Bill 16-077. And these were the basic pieces that were in that bill as far as what we wanted to actually happen. So we wanted to basically develop a strategic plan with recommendations for change, and we tied it back to the legislature on an annual basis so that we had to report out to the legislature and had to directly involve 5 state agencies, 5 state departments. But we further defined what CIE is and what Employment First is. And of course, these are all things that we all know, although I see I have CIE as the primary objective and preferred option. Our stuff was taken right from the national legislation and right from ODEP in a lot of the work that they do in making these definitions and creating some commonality of our understanding. So you can see we talked about barriers, we talked about rules and regulations, knowledge gaps, data gaps, and then we really had a problem systematically with pre-vocational services not being time limited as they were designed to be, but instead through basically little clauses within our rules and regulations, people were allowed to re-up for 5 years indefinitely. And so we wanted to try to correct that as well. Basically, we were helped a lot by local legislators who were familiar with Project Search and some of the success there, as well as the strong support of the businesses associated with Project Search through the state. My recollection is Indiana has a pretty vibrant Project Search network. It started with the local ARC, the ARC of Colorado, and the DD Council, basically building the language, the structure of the bill, and then bringing in additional collaborators to tweak that language. For those of you who've done legislation in the past, you know you can't have a gigantic collaboration group to create the basic structure of the bill unless you want to do it over a 5-year period, if you're lucky. So you try to get your core group to create that central piece and then make sure that you're getting additional collaborators in as you fine tune that legislative language. So in the statutory language, again, we were using a lot of ODEP's language here. Persons with significant disabilities are capable of full participation in competitive integrated employment and community life, regardless of level of disability. You can no longer discriminate against people because they have a significant disability, because we've figured out how to do that now. We established this Employment First Advisory Partnership that I've continued to chair throughout its existence. I'll be stepping down in a few months here, but we wanted to make sure that this group was broad enough with stakeholder representation that we had a variety of advocacy working with state agencies to make sure that we continued to bring change about. We decided to put it under the State Rehab Council because we felt that that was one way to make sure that we had continued advocate oversight, but was also a way, practically speaking, to make sure the fiscal note was not going to blast us out of the water. So this group, this Employment First Advisory Partnership, is composed of education, higher education, our Medicaid agency, behavioral health, and our VR agency. And we wanted to make sure that we continued to have some outside influence, and thus you'll see the National Association promoting employment first policies and practices. That's a tip of the hat to APSI, if you haven't figured that out. We wanted to make sure that we had APSI representation to make sure that we continued to go in a direction that exhibited best practice. Advocates for people with intellectual disabilities. And this bill actually started out, as you might imagine, since it was the ARC and the Colorado DD Council, it started out as a developmental disability bill. But as we brought more stakeholders in, we were basically, on a practical level, forced to make it a cross-disability employment first bill. And in hindsight, that was good. At the time, I didn't think so, I must admit. But it has brought broader support, certainly, for our efforts by expanding that out beyond just the IDD area. And certainly, we've had a lot of work that we've done on IPS in the mental health side and, of course, customized employment. So other people with disabilities who were seeking employment or were actually engaged in competitive integrated employment, families of people with disabilities, and community members who had no affiliation with agencies. So maybe some people would say we stacked the deck to make sure that we had this strong advocacy presence, and I guess they'd be right. But I'll tell you, when you're working with 5 state agencies who are, I just couldn't tell you enough about how great they are as far as what level of cooperation we've had. But they're part of the bureaucracy. They're part of that part of government that has a very challenging time changing. And so all of those groups were represented that I mentioned a moment ago, but we really felt we had to beef up on the advocacy side to make sure that we continued to move. This piece is important in that we were, as this group, which was established for a 5-year period, we sunset September 1 of this year of 2021. EFAP sunsets based on that original bill. But we were to identify the barriers, create the strategic plan to try to move past the barriers. And then we're basically within statute, we are to continue to meet to consider revisions to the plan and provide advice and expertise relating to subsequent implementation of the plan. This was just so darn important because I'll tell you, as we went through this period, people said, well, we did our plan in 2017, I guess we can disband. And if you're going to get systems change done, you need to keep on it, and you need to keep evaluating how certain interventions are working and then modifying your interventions on that basis. And that's part of the beauty of how this legislation was written. I just couldn't get rid of this. I love the picture, although it does look a little bit like smoke. But this is a picture of the Colorado Capitol. And I have Whose House, Our House at the top, which is a quote from January 6th. Sorry. But, you know, it is so critically important for the grassroots, for everybody to feel more comfortable with interacting with our legislators. I can tell you, I'm not completely comfortable, even after doing this work for many years. But we've got to demystify the Capitol and demystify our legislators so that people can feel more comfortable in letting them know what's up and how they can benefit the lives of people with disabilities. So after we put this bill into place, it led 2 years later, or actually 1 year later, because of course you have to start legislation about a year ahead of the legislative session. So we passed it and then immediately started working on our next bill, which was Senate Bill 18-145. This is Implement Employment First recommendations. And we started to build into statute some of these specific areas that we felt were important, again, to promote systems change. It included having discovery be identified as a payable service under VR. It included training and certification for both VR and Medicaid job coach organizations so that we started to build some competence in that area. And this data thing, this outcome data specificity, where we basically said, this is the stuff we need. Let's make sure that we're getting all of these different components of the outcome data. Interestingly, as we brought in the service agency stakeholder group, and again, I was displeased with this at the time, but it's working well now. We basically funded all of the supported employment training and certification fees. So that's funded by state government. And we even reimburse for the time that staff spend in going to those trainings and in attending the certification test of 3 hours. So this is what brought in providers more enthusiastically as we move this forward. We continued to look at what additional legislation can we run. And the answer resulted from some discussions that I ended up having with Colorado's budget director, who just happened to have a daughter, 8 years old, with Down syndrome. And we talked about employment first, what we had done over the initial 2 years, where we were at. And the budget director basically brought together some of the essential state agencies and the council, and we figured out an appropriation. The appropriation was matched by VR. So, golly, I forget what the match percentage is now. It's a great percentage though. You know, it's 1 for 4. So basically we were able to use state dollars that came out of a cash fund and matched it through RSA, through Rehab Services Administration, brought it back to the state at $7.2 million over a 3-year period. And so that just was able to fund a variety of those recommendations that we had put into our strategic plan back in 2017. What's the next step after that? Well, that was in 2019. We got the gigantic appropriation, both to the Medicaid agency and to the VR organization. You can see here, it funded the Office of Employment First. It funded a customized employment pilot, an outcome-based rate incentive pilot that we're still working on through the Medicaid agency, and then 4 additional VR staff who were focused on changing the VR agency to be more aligned with employment first activities. So you heard Julie reference this piece. This bill went through its 3rd reading in the House this morning and is going back to the Senate for amendment reconciliation. So this is Senate Bill 21039. We're working on it very actively to try to get all the players. And I'll tell you again, just with these other bills, we had to make sure we satisfied. In this case, it was the departments. The Department of Labor and Employment, where VR sits, was very concerned that we were taking over their responsibility for eliminating subminimum wage. It was just a terrible fight initially with them this year in trying to get them to agree to any of this. Their first move back to us was a complete strike blow, where there was no, basically took almost everything out of the bill when it came to getting rid of 14C subminimum wage. But this is where we're at right now. Basically, we had talked about, again, in the legislative declaration, that this was an economic justice issue. The agencies will submit plans that will show how they would reduce 14C over a 4-year period. There will be a rate recommendation from EFAP, that's the Employment First Advisory Partnership that was created back in 2016, to look at how can we make sure that the rates are adequate for this, so that employers are actually incentivized, and not employers, I mean service agencies are actually incentivized to do this work, to make sure that those rates are adequate. The new waiver services include Medicaid paid benefits counseling. We already have VR paying for that, but once the case is closed, those expense responsibilities fall on Medicaid. And so Medicaid benefits counseling, Medicaid buy-in, job supervision, which I'm hoping we'll be able to move toward the option to do co-worker supports as well, which basically has resulted in a significant cost savings when some of the analysis was done about job coaches who are sitting on those job sites for months and months and months. And this would be a lower cost kind of job supervision mechanism. And then really tried to make sure that some of our concern about service rationing was eliminated, where people would have to make a choice. Do I want to be able to do community connections, or do I want to be able to work? Or do I want to be able to get homemaking services in my home to learn how to be more independent? Or do I want to learn how to work? We're taking employment completely out of that funding, annual service plan funding document, so that it can be independent of that, and people don't have to make those kinds of choices. So this bill is almost through, and this, I mentioned the sunset of the Employment First Advisory Partnership. Of course, we're trying to get rid of that sunset and have it continue to extend indefinitely. We are through the Senate. This is at a point where it is in appropriations right now, and we're getting ready to have it be passed by the entire House. So this also not only creates this indefinite status for the Employment First Advisory Partnership, but also creates a hiring preference for people with disabilities. This is under our recommendation, state as model employer, where we are trying to encourage state government to, I hate to say it, preferentially hire people with disabilities so people can get their foot in the door. And so this would provide a 5-point preference on the point system that we would use, similar to what veterans currently get. And we're hoping that this will expand employment for people with disabilities within state government. It starts at the Department of Labor and Employment, and hopefully will move on to all departments after that. So, as I said at the very beginning, I continue to feel that we need to continue to work on systems change. It can never be just a done deal, or at least not in my lifetime. We have to continue to link it to civil rights, national laws like the ADA and the Olmstead ruling, and realize the linkage that we have with other civil rights movements in this country. Some of the legislative lessons learned over this 5-year period, where we have passed a number of appropriations and bills for Employment First, is, as I just mentioned, this link to social justice, non-discrimination, basic citizens' rights, referencing the benefit of employment to all people. Something I didn't mention before, but was really important for our first bill, was the cost benefit, using some of Rob Samara's research and making sure that state government understands that this is not some pie in the sky thing that doesn't benefit taxpayers. It does. It's cost beneficial to move toward integration and away from segregation. Collaborate with everyone after you've created some of those basic ideas about what the legislation is all about. It sure makes it a lot easier to pass legislation when you've got other members of the disability community and other community members behind you. As we developed our Employment First Advisory Partnership membership, we tried to make sure that we weren't going to have to constantly argue about values. And so we tried to focus on people who believed in this and who were committed to seeing this work. And that has saved us an immense amount of time. The primacy of advocates to continue to push this change has been important, I believe, and we're trying to build mechanisms as this group goes on to make sure that that continues. Best practice, of course, is essential if we're going to get outcomes. And then I don't know if you all have seen the latest research that just came out a couple of weeks ago from posthumously from Mad City, from Madison, Wisconsin. But basically, Lou Brown and Betsy Shiraga and others put together a 50-year look at the results of what the Madison School District did and what adult service programs did in Madison in supporting people with the most significant disabilities. It just proves what we've been saying forever, and that is that this just makes sense and it can be done. So I've got some references for you there, and I hope I'm on time for questions or comments.
You sure are, Bob. That was really phenomenal. Thank you so much. You have made significant and sustained impact in Colorado and nationally and internationally, and we're so grateful for your work and for sharing it with us today. You've really given us a lot to chew on, a lot to think about as Indiana continues to plan to move forward. So yes, Susan had invited our participants to pose questions for you in our chat room. And so we're going to begin, if you don't mind. First question is from Emily Munson, and she is with Indiana Disability Rights. And she asked, Bob, why did the bill mandate participation by people with intellectual disabilities, but not necessarily people with other types of severe disability? Was it based on the specific employment rate of people with IDD or based upon the preferences of the individuals drafting the bill?
Yeah, I mean, it started as an IDD bill. And that's partially because people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have such a concerning competitive integrated employment rate in Colorado. We, as I mentioned, we pushed it up above 50% at one point. It went down to 9%. And so this was the focus of the initial bill. But golly, we, I think I can speak for most people on the EFAP, the Employment First Advisory Partnership, that we're glad that we made it cross disability because it's become a stronger movement across Colorado. And having Centers for Independent Living, Atlantis community in Denver, ADAPT, the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, we've got some real players that are behind our efforts as a result of making this cross disability, and that's just made the movement stronger, and I think has facilitated us getting some of these other bills passed as well.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. And work to include in Indiana is cross disability as well. We have a question from Deanne Hart asking you, what are you doing to employ people who may be individuals with disabilities who work with Work One centers? Is that the term you're using in Colorado?
Is that a reference to Ability One?
No, those are workforce development.
Oh,
yeah. And she's asking and not community rehab agencies that, where you can access support through Voc Rehab. And so the issue is not finding the direct service support of somebody in perhaps a job coach role to meet their support needs for employment. She's basically asking, how are you addressing similar concerns?
And again, I don't know how it works in all states, but I'll tell you in Colorado, traditionally, when the workforce center staff worked with a person with a significant disability, they brought them in and then said, let me give you the address of the VR agency. So within our initial legislation, we did have basically that one of our goals was to look at the workforce system plan, the Colorado plan for workforce development, and to make sure that these kinds of employment first issues were included in that. As we did that, we have had more involvement, and in fact had the director of the Workforce Development Council, the Colorado Workforce Development Council, became very involved with Employment First over the first several years. But to say that we've made a whole lot of inroads in developing the kinds of skills and knowledge on the part of the workforce centers to be able to work with people with more significant disabilities has just not happened. We've not been successful in that. We do have some goals within our plan to better educate the workforce development system in being able to work with people with more significant disabilities, but the inroads there for us have been minimal. So we've not had much success.
Well, we've had fits and starts in Indiana as well, but when we did a side-by-side comparison of our Employment First plan goals with the governor's workforce cabinet goals, PJ McGrew, they're beautifully aligned. So hopefully we can continue to build that collaboration and partnership. So we have Tina Skeel asking you talked about training for employment specialists, but what training and oversight is done to ensure benefits counseling done through waiver services are accurate and up to date? How do you ensure individuals are getting the right info?
Well, we are requiring, at this point, we are requiring that people use the Virginia Commonwealth University CWIC training platform. I think there's been some consideration of using Cornell, but basically at this point, we're looking at the VCU model to make sure that those benefits planners are being fully trained and get the experience they need prior to becoming certified to know that they know how to do this stuff, because the complexity, of course, is significant. We were able to build in another piece within that 2019 appropriation to bring DB 101 into the state. That's going to launch within the next month. And for those of you who may not know how Disability Benefits 101 works, it doesn't try to answer all the questions. It still depends on a cadre of benefits planners who know their stuff. So basically, it gives you information about how to work your benefits and better understand the impact of earnings on your benefits. But at the tail end of that, it says, in order to really figure this out, you need to talk to a CWIC, or CPWIC, I think is the other acronym, to be able to know what's going on with your particular benefits. So we haven't passed the Medicaid-based competencies yet for benefits planning, but the VR piece has been in place for, I think, 3 years now. And it does, if you're going to get paid for that service, you need to be qualified through the CWIC or CPWIC.
Okay, thank you. Another question came in asking if you have a website in Colorado of current grantors for organizations who assist people with disabilities who are having problems finding funding? That's asking even beyond state and federal funding, I guess.
I don't believe so the question is, if VR is not serving a person, if the Voc Rehab Agency is not funding, and if a person is not served under one of the Medicaid waivers, then is there another funding resource? Is that the question?
That's what appears to be Carolyn's question. And Carolyn, certainly, yes, she says yes.
Yeah. We don't have anything like that yet. The Office of Employment First is working with a lot of people within Colorado right now, and it's mostly on the education and training side, but not just the technical training, also an introduction to customized employment and supported employment, so that other stakeholders within the community can better understand this. So no, we have no kind of funding like that, but I would imagine if the office heard of a person who needed that kind of funding, that they would take that on and try to facilitate that for that person. But we do not have any kind of a grant system like that I'm aware of, at least.
Okay. I do not see any other direct questions.
Pat, there's one from Deanne. Deanne asks, the community of people who are blind find that their value in both receiving homemaking services and appointment services. There is value in receiving both of those services. Why does the rest of the population not agree with a holistic approach to rehabilitation?
I'm not sure I can speak to that. The Colorado Center for the Blind has been involved with these employment first issues somewhat in the state, but not to the level that I would have liked them to be. But that kind of philosophical question, I think, is a good question. I sure as heck don't have the answer. I can't be responsive to that. I'm sorry.
Our siloed system where they bite off a piece of people's lives.
Yes.
Yeah, and ne'er the twain shall meet oftentimes. Well, Bob, that is the end of the questions in the chat room. And I want to remind our participants that all of the presentations will be posted on our website after the summit. So you will have access to Bob's slides with your permission, Bob.
Absolutely. And my email is on the title slide. So if you'd like to ask questions about what we're doing here, and I don't even pretend like we're the expert or anything. We just like Indiana are just trying to move the envelope forward and do the best we can. But certainly, if there's any way that we can help any of your efforts here in Indiana, don't hesitate to drop me a line.
That's wonderful, Bob.
Yeah, thank you so much. You've given us plenty to think about and work with. Take good care. We know where you live.
All right. Sounds good.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Well, I'm sure at this point in the afternoon, your brains are full and you have lots of ideas floating around in terms of what we need to grab, what we need to run with, how we can use the information that's been shared this afternoon. So it is your turn. This is the time when we are going to get you into breakout rooms randomly assigned. And once you're in, then we're going to skip the intros for the sake of time, but you're going to assign a note keeper and a timekeeper just to help with the time frame. It is about 25 minutes from in a few minutes. So let's say 3:05 until about 4:15, 20. And we'll call you back. You'll get a 60-second warning that you'll be called back to the large group setting. You'll have a facilitator in your group, and that facilitator will highlight with you what's already planned, and that's through a review of the Employment First Plan action steps, and that link was sent to you in the chat room. Just do that briefly. That's about 5 minutes. And then wrap your head around what you heard today. That's a major discussion. What did you hear today that was exciting, that you think Indiana needs to hold on to, build upon, and integrate into our plan and our next steps? So once you've had that open discussion, then prioritize what you feel are your top 3 of those action steps. And your note taker will over to Kelsey from IU Conferences. And then the third step is to look ahead to what is next. That's a shorter discussion, just 5 to 10 minutes. And that is when your facilitator will point you to a poll with the link also in your chat room to complete. And we will reconvene and look at the outcome of your polling. So with that, I am going to ask Susan if I forgot any important instructions.
No, I think that's great. And there'll be a facilitator in each of your sessions to kind of help make things move forward. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in the breakout rooms.
Thank you. And so Kelsey, let's go ahead and open the breakout rooms. You're all fine with being back in the large group. No need to jump back into your small group. So just make sure that you take the time to complete that survey and submit that. And we can get those results from you immediately. If you take that.
Is the link for the survey in the chat?
It is. It's under Susan Rennie posted it, and it's that the only one that looks like it's a website. The HTTPS. Yeah.
Thank you. I found it.
353. Thank you.
Oh.
I'm going to go and start pulling up the results, guys. I've got 9 responses.
Good.
10.
I'm not sure I'm where I'm supposed to be.
It's in the chat room.
It says browse dad plan.
Oh, no, I don't think that's it, Deanne.
It should say it's at 3:53 p.m. Susan posted it, and it looks like drive.google.com.
Thank you, Megan. She put it in there.
It's the last thing in the chat now.
Yeah, last thing in
thank
the chat.
you.
Yeah, thanks. Megan and Emily.
I turned mine in.
Okay.
I got 19. Pat, you want me to share my screen?
You bet.
Okay, there it is. It's like,
Good.
that's weird.
So we can see 23 responses so far.
Cool.
25. Now I know there's a, what do we have? We have 42 people on, so we should get close to 42.
Sorry, it's going to take me a minute here.
Oh, no worries. No worries.
Mary Ellen's computer was messing up and it took her off. So I don't know.
Ah,
I
She
had
got
that
to do the
happen
poll.
during Sam's presentation.
oh, yeah, we
Thanks.
just,
Okay.
the poll only calls for one affiliation. Sorry about that, but yeah, just pick the one that best.
Your primary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so We have 28 responses.
Not yet.
Can you all see? I don't know if this is all in the screen or not.
Pretty much. Yep.
Do I need to make this larger for anyone?
Got it. It's submitted now.
The action steps section is too low. There we go. Now it's big.
Yeah, I can't get it all on there, but this is the action steps. Providing ongoing, so far that's winning, providing ongoing professional development for state agency staff and case managers about employment first. And a close runner-up is transition funding to support and incentivize competitive integrative employment services while reducing segregated employment.
And the report card's pretty high too.
Yeah, that's great, guys.
We know that's your favorite, Susan.
Uh-huh. No, I love data. Data are us. So we'll keep this up and we'll show this again tomorrow. If you didn't get a chance to get to it, you can still click on it. And we're going to put the results up. And then if I just remind all the note takers to make sure you send Kelsey your recommendations so we can see what else we need to add to this.
Thank you so much to all of you who have stayed with us this afternoon and engaged in your conversations in the breakout rooms, posed your questions, and have been really thinking through where do we need to go from here. So thank you so much. We're going to give you a little forecast day 2, and we hope you can all return and join us tomorrow. Susan?
So tomorrow, we're going to start out with a number of our team leaders at 1:30 talking about why it's important for us to change and to move away from sheltered work and to competitive integrated employment. And I'm really excited to hear from Mark Hubler and Bonnie Bomer and Lauren Pilcher and Jeffrey Shear. So that gets us kicked off. So it's real important that we kick off with why we're doing this. And then Dr. Rogan is going to talk with us about just kind of what's happened nationally around change. Because really, organizations have shifted service delivery for the last 30 years.
Yes.
So we know a lot about what works.
Yep.
And then at around 2:15, we're going to hear from Vermont, the state of Vermont. They have a panel that's going to talk about how they eliminated sheltered work, I think around 10 years ago. And then we have a local success story in SURS down in southern Indiana, and they many years ago eliminated sub-minimum wage. And then we're going to do a similar breakout. We'll try to work out our kinks. And thank you for all the people who are facilitating today. I really appreciate it. And if you want to email your thoughts about what we could do differently tomorrow, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. We'll be sure to combine some of the breakout rooms, smaller number for with more participants per group. So with that, we are going to close for this afternoon. Certainly contact Susan and I if you have any follow-up thoughts about systems change or about the summit and tips for tomorrow. But otherwise, I hope to see you all at 1:30. Same link, same Zoom link. And again, thanks so much for being with us this afternoon.